It was a summer afternoon that began like any other, a backyard filled with laughter, the smoky scent of grilled corn and ribs wafting through the air, children running barefoot on grass still damp from the sprinkler. In the midst of this perfect family gathering, a single moment unraveled everything. Within the span of less than 5 minutes, little Emily, just 2 years and 8 months old, vanished without a trace. One moment she was chasing soap bubbles near the wooden fence, the next, gone. No scream, no sound, nothing but a silence so sharp it cut through the joy of the barbecue like shattered glass. The police were called instantly. Neighbors searched every inch of the neighborhood, woods, and nearby creek. Helicopters hovered. Volunteers combed through fields with flashlights well into the night. But there was no sign of her, no footprint, no item of clothing, not even the tiniest clue. The case quickly spiraled into national news. Yet with every day that passed, hope grew thinner. Grief devoured the family from the inside. Her parents stopped hosting barbecues. Her older brother stopped speaking. And her grandfather, who had built that bench under the big oak tree himself, stopped sitting on it altogether. 15 years later, on what would have been Emily's 17th birthday, her grandfather returned to that same bench for the first time. Weathered by time and sorrow, he sank onto the old wood, now cracked and faded, perhaps searching for peace or simply surrendering to memories. But something sharp brushed against the back of his hand, something tucked just beneath the bench slats. Curious, and with trembling fingers, he pulled it free. It was a small plastic sandwich bag, sealed with tape, and inside, a folded napkin stained with grease. Written on it, in childish scrawl, were 4 words that shattered the silence of the past decade and a half. I saw the man. What began as a day of celebration turned into a lifetime of unanswered questions. But this note, forgotten, hidden, perhaps even planted in desperation, opened a new chapter. Could it be a prank? A message overlooked for all these years? Or was it the first real thread in a mystery everyone believed was cold and buried forever? The grandfather held the napkin like it was burning through his hands, unsure whether it was hope returning or grief reborn. Because sometimes the truth doesn't knock. Sometimes it waits, quietly, right beneath where you last sat. And when it finally whispers, it changes everything you thought you knew. As the grandfather held the crumpled napkin in his hands, the backyard around him seemed to blur. The distant voices of his family, celebrating Emily's 17th birthday, without her became a distant echo. He stared at the childish handwriting, trying to make sense of it. I saw the man. 4 simple words. Innocent, almost cryptic, but heavy enough to reopen a wound that never truly healed. Who had written it? When? And why leave it taped beneath the bench where no one would ever think to look, except him, on this particular day? His mind reeled back to that afternoon in July, so many years ago. The smell of burgers, the bright laughter of children, the sound of a toy bouncing down the patio steps. Emily had been giggling near the rose bushes just moments before she vanished. No one had heard a scream. No tire marks on the lawn. No sign of struggle. It was as if she had simply evaporated into the summer air. The thought haunted him every night since. And now, this note, this message, appeared like a ghost demanding to be heard. He didn't tell anyone at first. Not his daughter, not the police, not even his wife. There was something sacred about that moment, private, almost divine. He carefully slipped the napkin into a book in his study, right between the pages of an old detective novel he hadn't touched in years. Then he began to search, not with flashlights or search dogs this time, but with old memories, photographs, and every detail he could recall from that long-ago day. He needed to know who might have been close enough to see what no one else did. Late that night, after the family had gone to bed, he retrieved the box of old photos labeled Summer 2008. Among them were shots of the barbecue, Emily with mustard on her chin, the kids around the sprinkler, the adults chatting near the grill. And then, one photo, nearly forgotten, caught his eye. It had been taken by his wife, who loved to document everything. In the background, barely visible through the trees, stood a man, tall, wearing a hat, turned slightly away from the camera. He didn't recognize him, and he didn't remember anyone like that being invited. His heart pounded. He enlarged the photo on his phone, zooming in until the pixels distorted. Still, The presence of the man chilled him. Why would someone stand that far back, away from the group, watching? The image didn't give answers, only more questions. Was this the man the note referred to? Had a child seen him lurking? Perhaps Emily herself? Or maybe one of the other kids? He couldn't sleep that night. All he could think about was that figure, silent, distant, and now, after 15 years, more terrifying than ever. The following morning, he returned to the bench. Sunlight filtered through the oak leaves above, casting broken patterns on the grass. He knelt down, brushing his fingers beneath the wooden slats, hoping, needing, there to be something more. A second note, a forgotten clue, anything. But there was nothing else taped beneath it. Just dust, cobwebs, and a small, rusted screw. The napkin had been the only thing. Yet it had stirred something in him, an urgency that had long been buried under resignation. He decided to visit the neighborhood kids who had once played in that yard. They were adults now, scattered across cities, with families of their own. But maybe, just maybe, one of them remembered something they never thought was important. He began with Dylan, the boy who had been 8 at the time and lived just 2 houses down. After a long pause on the phone, Dylan agreed to meet. They sat across from each other at a cafe, the tension thick as silence filled the space between them. When the grandfather finally showed him the photo of the man, near the trees, Dylan's face changed. He didn't speak right away, but his hand trembled slightly. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I always thought he was someone your family knew. I remember him. He asked me if I wanted a balloon." That sentence froze the old man in place. He hadn't known that any adult outside the family had spoken to the children that day. Dylan continued, recalling how the man disappeared as quickly as he had appeared, before anyone could even ask his name. The grandfather leaned in. "Did Emily see him too?" Dylan hesitated. "I think so. She was right next to me when he showed up. Then she ran off toward the fence. I thought she was chasing something." For the first time in 15 years, the grandfather felt something other than sorrow. He felt direction. If Emily had followed that man, if he had lured her away, then perhaps she hadn't just vanished. Perhaps she had been taken. And if someone had seen that, someone who left that note, then maybe they had been trying to tell the truth all along. He returned home shaken, but determined. He pulled out every record he had, police reports, old witness statements, even drawings the kids had made that summer. His study transformed into a war room of memories and evidence. That note, once forgotten, had cracked open the case in a way no investigation had. It hadn't just been a goodbye. It had been a cry for help, one that had waited, patiently, for 15 long years to be heard. That night, the grandfather sat alone in his study, the dim glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. He stared at the photo of the man by the tree again, now printed and pinned to a corkboard among maps, names, and timelines. His hand trembled slightly as he traced the shape of the figure. So many years had passed, but the presence of that man in the background, half hidden and silent, now seemed central to everything. He wondered why no one noticed him before. Had the grief blinded them? Or had the man carefully positioned himself to be forgotten? He began making calls to everyone who had been at the barbecue that day. Some didn't remember much. Others spoke with guilt in their voices, regretting not paying closer attention. But none recognized the man in the photo. Not one. It was as if he had slipped in and out of their lives like a shadow. Then, during a conversation with Emily's great-aunt Ruth, a detail emerged. "I do remember someone," she said slowly. "I was on my way to the bathroom at the back of the house, and I saw a man near the fence. He was just standing there. I thought he was waiting for someone." She had never mentioned it before. In the chaos of the disappearance, the emotion, and the confusion, she had simply forgotten. But now, her recollection sent chills down the grandfather's spine. The man had been near the fence, the exact direction Emily had last been seen running toward. It confirmed Dylan's story. It confirmed the photo. And most disturbingly, it suggested that the man had stayed long enough to be seen by multiple people, and still managed to vanish without a trace. The grandfather began searching through police archives, requesting access to any reports of suspicious individuals in the area around that time. He combed through old missing person bulletins, unsolved crimes, even local loitering complaints. Nothing matched exactly. But in a crime database, under an unrelated case file from a neighboring town, he found something chilling. A composite sketch from the same year, 2008, of a man suspected of attempting to lure a child into a van. The resemblance to the figure in the photo was disturbing. His heart pounded. Could it be him? Was Emily's case not an isolated tragedy, but part of something larger? He printed the sketch and placed it beside the photo. The facial structure, the hat, the general posture, it all seemed too similar to ignore. But the case in question had been dropped due to lack of evidence. The man had never been caught, and if it truly was the same person, it meant he had been preying on children in multiple towns. The grandfather sat back, suddenly aware that what he was uncovering wasn't just about his granddaughter. It was about something far darker than he had imagined. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't a closed chapter. It was a thread still unraveling, one that might connect to other families, other missing children, other unanswered cries. He felt the weight of it settle on his chest like a stone. For years, they had accepted that Emily was gone, swallowed by the void of the unknown. But now, the unknown had a shape, a face, and possibly a name, buried somewhere deep within forgotten police records. He knew he couldn't stop now, no matter where the path led. He scheduled a meeting with Detective Linda Carver, the original officer assigned to Emily's case. Now retired, she was living a quiet life in a small lakeside town. When he called her and explained what he'd found, there was a long pause on the line. 15 years, she said softly, and that case still haunts me. She agreed to meet. When he arrived, he found her porch filled with wind chimes and garden gnomes. Yet her eyes, sharp and searching, were those of someone who never truly stopped being a cop. As he laid the photo and the composite sketch on her table, her expression darkened. She didn't need convincing. "I've seen this man before," she murmured, "but we could never tie him to anything concrete. He was always one step ahead. Changed vehicles, names, even accents." She flipped through her old files, her fingers moving with a memory honed by obsession. "We believed he targeted events, places with kids, noise, distractions, barbecues, parks, school fairs. He vanished into crowds." The grandfather felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. If this was the same man, then he had likely stalked Emily that day, watched her, waited for the exact moment when eyes turned away. Linda looked at him. "There's a woman you need to speak with. Her daughter disappeared under similar circumstances. Same year, same county. She received a note too, but no one took it seriously." That revelation struck like lightning. Another note, another family. The pattern was undeniable now. He wrote down the name, Clara Monroe, a mother who, like him, had lived with an open wound for over a decade. And she too had found a message, one the authorities had dismissed as a cruel prank. But what if it wasn't? What if, all along, someone had been leaving breadcrumbs for those willing to keep searching? The grandfather knew then. This wasn't about closure. It was about truth. And sometimes, the truth doesn't come with answers. Sometimes, it comes with the terrifying realization that the story is far from over. Clara Monroe lived in a modest house on the edge of town, surrounded by tall, untrimmed hedges and the weary silence of someone who had waited far too long for peace. When the grandfather knocked on her door, it creaked open slowly. She studied him for a moment, her expression cautious but curious. "You're here about the note," she said before he could even speak. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had told her story too many times to people who didn't believe it. Inside, the living room was lined with photos, some framed, some curling at the edges from age. At the center of them all was a smiling girl with pigtails, missing her front teeth, Olivia. She had vanished during a 4th of July festival in 2008. Clara poured tea but didn't drink it. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out a plastic sleeve containing a single, torn piece of notebook paper. On it, written in large, shaky letters, were the words, "He said not to scream." The moment the grandfather read the sentence, his breath caught. Different wording from Emily's note, but the same feel, the same eerie simplicity, the same implied presence of a predator whose voice had once reached a child. Clara explained that she had found the note tucked under a loose floorboard in Olivia's bedroom 2 years after the disappearance. The police had dismissed it as a prank. No fingerprints, no clear timeline, just pain and silence. But now, with the discovery of Emily's napkin, the pattern could no longer be ignored. 2 notes, 2 children, same year, same area, and both referencing a man whose actions were shrouded in silence. Clara leaned forward. I always believed someone was trying to help. A sibling, a friend, maybe even another victim who got away. Someone too scared to speak, but brave enough to leave a clue. That theory wrapped around the grandfather like a fog. Had someone witnessed both abductions? Was the same silent witness trying to speak again? Clara opened a drawer and retrieved a small stack of pages. Copies of letters she had sent to local newspapers, investigators, and child safety organizations over the years. No one had followed up. No one had believed her. Until now. If this man is still out there, she said, then he's not finished. He doesn't just disappear. He watches. He waits. Her eyes locked with his. And maybe he's still watching us. Driving home that evening, the grandfather couldn't shake Clara's words. He's still watching. It felt less like a warning and more like a whisper from the past, something hiding in plain sight. He passed by the old church near his neighborhood and remembered how Emily loved to play in the gravel lot beside it. He parked and sat quietly, watching the building, the shadows, the echoes of laughter that no longer existed. Could someone really have seen everything, twice, and remained silent all this time? Back at home, he examined both notes side by side under the yellow glow of his desk lamp. Emily's napkin. I saw the man. Olivia's page. He said not a scream. 2 different voices. One observer, one victim. But maybe, just maybe, not 2 different people writing them. What if the same child had left both? Or someone who had been there at both scenes? The idea was impossible, yet strangely plausible. He needed a new perspective, someone trained to analyze patterns, handwriting, trauma. He called a retired criminal profiler he knew through an old friend. Her name was Marlene Shaw, a quiet woman with sharp instincts and decades of experience working on child abduction cases. When he met her the next day and showed her the notes, she was silent for a long time. Finally, she said, "These don't feel like messages from the victims. They feel like messages from someone who saw what happened. Someone who didn't act, maybe couldn't, but needed to unload the truth in the only way they knew how." Her analysis aligned with Clara's gut feeling. Someone had been present. Someone had tried to help. Then she asked a question he hadn't considered. Have you checked for other notes? Similar messages found by other families. The grandfather hadn't. He didn't even know how to begin. But Marlene did. She had access to old FBI reports, digital crime archives, and connections who owed her favors. She promised to look. Before leaving, she said, "You're not chasing a ghost. You're chasing a man who doesn't know he left behind a trail." That night, the grandfather dreamed of Emily. In the dream, she was standing just beyond the fence, holding a piece of paper in her hand. She didn't speak. She just pointed. When he woke up, his hands were shaking, his pillows soaked with sweat. The dream didn't offer answers, but it lit a fire. There was something else out there, something waiting to be found. And for the first time in 15 years, he felt that the story wasn't ending. It was only beginning. The next morning, the grandfather received a call from Marlene. Her voice was steady, but beneath the surface, there was tension. "I found something," she said. "You're going to want to see this for yourself." She directed him to a digital archive of unsolved cases, buried within a state database. Among dozens of missing children reports, one stood out. Case hashtag 2008-43. A child named Noah Carmichael, age 6, vanished from a county fair in a neighboring state. Date: August 15, 2008. Just 6 weeks after Emily. He opened the report with trembling hands. Noah's disappearance bore chilling similarities. No signs of struggle, vanishing during a crowded public event, and a witness, a young girl, who later claimed she had seen a man with a balloon and a hat. The image sent a jolt through his chest. A balloon. A hat. Dylan had mentioned that the man who approached him at the barbecue had offered him a balloon too. The same lure, the same tactics, different towns. And once again, no one had ever identified the suspect. What disturbed him most, though, was the detail Marlene found buried in the supplemental notes. Noah's older cousin, who had been 9 at the time, told police during questioning that a man told Noah to follow him because he had something cool to show. The cousin later drew a picture of a man in a wide-brimmed hat standing beside a van with no windows. The picture was dismissed as imagination. but it matched, almost identically, the figure in the photograph from Emily's barbecue. 3 children. 1 image. 1 method. He called Clara immediately. When she answered, her voice was already filled with dread. She had seen the same file. Marlene had shared it with her too. Together, they started marking a map with dates, towns, and victims. The triangle they formed was no coincidence. It was a route, a path of opportunity. This man hadn't just stumbled into lives. He'd planned his movements, targeted specific events, gatherings, and families who wouldn't expect a predator in plain sight. The grandfather stood in front of the map, now filled with pins, lines, and notes. Each one represented a life torn apart, a memory cut short. But more than that, they formed a pattern, and patterns could be followed. The man had left traces. He had been careful, but not perfect. And now, for the first time, the grandfather wasn't just searching for his granddaughter. He was hunting the man who took her, a man who had remained hidden in the cracks of time, but not anymore. In the days that followed, the grandfather and Clara spoke constantly. Their bond, forged in grief, had transformed into a partnership. Clara managed the growing archive of related cases, while the grandfather chased down leads and testimonies. Marlene connected them with other families, those who had been too afraid, too tired, or too ignored to continue searching. Each story added another piece to the puzzle. It was no longer a question of if the man existed. It was now about when he would surface again. One of the families led them to an old community blog, written by a retired schoolteacher named Miss Gloria, who had once documented neighborhood events in 2008. Buried deep in a July entry, she had written about a stranger loitering near the playground during a church fair who seemed to have no child of his own. The description was brief, almost casual, but when they found a grainy photo attached to the post, their breath caught. In the corner, barely visible, was the hat. The hat again. Always the hat. A different color this time, but the shape was unmistakable. It was as though the man wore it intentionally, like a signature. And suddenly, they realized he wasn't hiding in every picture. They just hadn't known what to look for. They went back to photos from other families, old fair videos uploaded to forgotten YouTube channels, archive footage from local news stations covering summer events. The grandfather spent hours scouring frames, pausing, zooming, enhancing. And slowly, a face began to emerge. It was never fully visible. A jawline here, a profile there. But it was enough. Enough to know he had been there, watching, always just out of reach. Marlene compiled the visual fragments and sent them to a facial reconstruction expert she trusted. If they could build even a partial model, it might lead to identification. And if they could ID him, it could unlock records, background checks, past arrests, aliases, everything they had been denied for over a decade. The grandfather felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Momentum. The pieces were moving. The past was no longer silent. But with that hope came fear. If they were closing in on the truth, it meant the man might feel it too. And if he had been watching all this time, then who was watching him now? Or worse, who wasn't? Days later, Marlene called with results. The expert had managed to assemble a partial facial reconstruction based on the collected images. It wasn't perfect, but it gave him something. A narrow jawline, high cheekbones, a long, slightly curved nose. Most notably, a faint scar along the right temple. Barely visible, but consistent in 2 different photos, taken years apart. They now had a face. Not a ghost, not a silhouette, but a man. Real, tangible, and dangerous. Marlene submitted the reconstruction to a database that cross-checked unsolved cases with known offenders and persons of interest. Hours turned into days. The grandfather couldn't sleep. He sat by the phone like a soldier waiting for orders. He replayed every moment from that summer of 2008. What Emily wore, the last sound she made, the way the sun hit the yard when she vanished. Each memory sharpened, edged with guilt. But now he had a weapon against the past, clarity. When the call finally came, it was Marlene again, her voice firmer this time. We might have a match. She spoke the name, Raymond Elmer Deeks, a former carnival worker, arrested twice in the late 1990s for child endangerment, but charges had been dropped due to lack of evidence. He had no fixed address, no social media, no driver's license renewal in over a decade. He'd lived on the edges of towns, using temporary jobs and false names. A ghost in paperwork. But now, they had a face to go with the name. The grandfather's hands shook as he scribbled it down. "Where is he now?" he asked. Marlene hesitated. "That's the problem. He hasn't shown up anywhere since 2011. No trace. But someone like him doesn't just vanish unless they want to. Or unless they're still out there, doing the same thing, somewhere new." The silence that followed was heavy. What if he was still watching children? Still wearing that same damn hat? Still convincing kids to follow him? Promising balloons, or secrets, or wonder? Clara joined them at Marlene's home that evening. They spread the documents across a table, connecting timelines, cross-referencing events with Deeks' known locations. Patterns emerged. Summer festivals, church picnics, outdoor birthday parties. Always in the same months, June through August. Always near rural towns with small police forces. He had known how to disappear in plain sight. But now, for the first time, they had more than a theory. They had a name, a pattern, a purpose. The following morning, the grandfather returned to the backyard where it all began. The bench sat in silence, unchanged except for the age of the wood. He sat there again, hands clasped, eyes scanning the fence line. What had Emily seen? What had she heard in those final seconds before she vanished? His heart ached with the possibility that she might have trusted the man, followed him out of innocent curiosity. Or worse, that she had been afraid and too small to resist. As he sat, a neighbor's child chased a soccer ball across the lawn. For a moment, he froze, seeing Emily's face in the blur of motion. But when the boy turned, the illusion vanished. Still, it brought him back to that moment, the exact point in time when everything broke. He stood and walked toward the fence. The boards creaked softly under his hand. And then he noticed something odd, barely visible beneath the lowest plank where ivy had overgrown the base. A piece of fabric. He dropped to his knees, heart thundering. With careful fingers, he pulled at the edge of the cloth until it came free. It was a small strip of faded pink cotton, child-sized, worn, fragile, stained with dirt and time. A pattern of tiny stars was still visible. His breath caught. Emily had been wearing a pink sundress that day, white stars along the hem. The discovery hit him like a blow to the chest. Could have been here all along, missed in the original search, hidden deliberately. He rushed inside and sealed the fabric in a plastic bag. Then he called Marlene. She arrived within the hour, gloves on, face grim. "We'll have it tested," she said. "DNA, fibers, anything. If it's hers, we'll know." As they stood over the bench, she added, "But if it was planted recently, it means someone's been here, watching, leaving reminders, maybe warnings." That possibility sent a cold chill down his spine. He scanned the tree line. No movement. But the silence felt deeper now, thicker, like it was hiding something just out of view. The grandfather knew then. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close. The man they were hunting might be closer than they thought. And Emily's story, what really happened that day, was waiting to be unearthed, one piece at a time. The results from the lab came in 3 days later. The fabric was confirmed to be a match for the sundress Emily had worn that day. Same cotton blend, same stitching pattern. More than that, a partial DNA profile had been extracted from sweat embedded in the fibers. It wasn't just hers. There was a second profile. Male. Unidentified. The news dropped like a thunderclap across the team. Marlene's voice trembled as she explained, "This could be our guy. If we can match this DNA to Raymond Deeks, it's no longer just suspicion. It's a case." But there was a problem. Deeks had never submitted DNA. His past arrests were too old to have required it. And he had disappeared before modern databases caught up with his record. They needed a relative, a sibling, a parent, even a distant cousin, to build a genetic link. The grandfather felt the urgency clawing at him. They had a fragment of truth in their hands, but without the right thread to tie it to, it could slip through their fingers just like before. Clara, always the one to think 3 steps ahead, began digging into Deeks' family history. She found a potential match, a sister named Lorraine Deeks, last known address in Kansas. A recluse, according to local gossip, who hadn't spoken to her brother in over 15 years. They reached out, first through a letter, then a phone call. To their surprise, Lorraine agreed to meet. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, but she didn't hang up. "If this is about Ray," she said, "you're not the first ones to come looking." That sentence hung in the air like a fog of secrets waiting to lift. When they met her in person, Lorraine was guarded, with sharp eyes and a nervous tick in her hands. She admitted that Ray had always been different, quiet, withdrawn, obsessed with children's magic tricks and carnival shows. He could disappear into a crowd like smoke, she said. He knew how to blend in, how to make people forget he was ever there. The most chilling part? She hadn't heard from him since 2010, but every year, like clockwork, she received a postcard. No words, just a photograph of an empty swing set or a distant playground. A child's place. A silent taunt. Marlene asked if she would consent to a DNA test. Lorraine hesitated, then nodded. "If he did what you think he did, I need to know." They collected the sample that night, and within 72 hours, the results confirmed it. Familial match. The DNA on the fabric beneath the fence had a 99.7% likelihood of being Raymond Delmer Deeks. The weight of it dropped on the grandfather like thunder. It was real. Finally, undeniably real. Emily had been taken, and now they knew who did it. The next phase was no longer about theories. It was about finding him, about confronting the man who had haunted dozens of families for nearly 2 decades. Marlene contacted federal agents, presenting the evidence. The match, the timeline, the pattern. But it came with a grim revelation. Raymond Deeks was officially listed as deceased, presumed dead after a fire in an abandoned property in New Mexico in 2011. The body found in the wreckage had been burned beyond recognition, but no DNA was ever matched. The grandfather stared at the file in disbelief. So they closed the case without knowing for sure. Marlene nodded. They found a wallet. His ID was inside, but no dental records. No confirmed DNA. Just a charred shell and a convenient end to a long chase. It reeked of manipulation. Clara, her voice colder than he had ever heard, said, "He faked his death." The idea seemed wild at first, until it didn't. Deeks had slipped through legal cracks for years. Creating an illusion of death would be his final, perfect vanishing act. They went back to the swing set postcards Lorraine had mentioned. Each one was postmarked from a different state. Different handwriting, different stamps, but always the same message. Absence. It was his signature, and it meant he was alive. Out there. Somewhere. Watching. The grandfather ran his fingers along the edge of the fabric bagged in evidence, eyes burning with unshed tears. "He left that piece of dress beneath the bench on purpose," he whispered. "He wanted us to know he's still in control." Clara stared out the window, voice shaking. Or maybe he's warning us not to keep looking. That thought hit like a stone. If Deeks knew they were getting close, if he knew they had found the notes, the photos, the patterns, would he retaliate? Would he go silent again, bury himself even deeper? Or would he escalate, taunting them like he had taunted Lorraine for years? Marlene leaned back, crossing her arms. "Whatever he plans, we won't stop. He's made a mistake. He left a trail, and we found it." The grandfather nodded slowly. He had feared for so long that the story ended in silence. But now he saw it clearly. Deeks wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was a shadow cast over the present, and maybe even the future. And as painful as it was to admit, Emily's disappearance might not be the final chapter. It might only be the beginning of a story that had waited 15 long years to be told. The breakthrough came in the form of an old habit, a pattern so small it almost went unnoticed. Marlene, reviewing the timeline of the postcards Lorraine received, realized each one had been mailed precisely 26 days after the 4th of July. Not 25, not 27, always 26. At first glance, it seemed random. But when they overlaid the timeline of Emily's disappearance, Olivia's, and Noah's, the 26-day marker aligned with other incidents. Reports of attempted abductions. Children found wandering alone. Police calls logged, but never connected. The grandfather stared at the map, now transformed from scattered red pins to an organized constellation. "He's not just watching," he said, voice low. "He's counting." They began cross-referencing those dates with town fair schedules across the past 15 years. The pattern emerged clearer than ever. He had been traveling in loops, small counties, low enforcement presence, always with a buffer of days that kept authorities from linking events. A traveling predator with a calendar as calculated as a chessboard. They traced the most recent postmark to a small town in Nebraska, Cedar Grove. A quiet community with a yearly summer festival set to happen in just 4 days. That detail sent a wave of nausea through the grandfather. He's going back there, Marlene said. He's following his own cycle. This isn't over. He's planning something. Clara clenched her fists. Then we need to be there first. For the first time since the nightmare began, they weren't chasing the past. They were preparing for the present. They contacted local law enforcement, presenting everything. The DNA match, the composite, the behavioral profile. A young sheriff named Cole Withers listened carefully, skepticism turning to belief as he flipped through the binder. If he's coming, the sheriff said, we'll be ready. They coordinated undercover teams, volunteers posing as parents, even subtle camera placements near children's tents and activity zones. The goal wasn't to scare the town. It was to outsmart a man who had spent years perfecting his own vanishing act. The grandfather stood near the entrance of the fairground on opening day, heart pounding with every child's laugh that echoed through the air. Clara was positioned near the carousel. Marlene watched from a distance near the first aid tent, eyes tracking every movement. Then, just past 3 o'clock, a man in a wide-brimmed hat stepped out from the shadow of the snack stand. He moved with ease. No panic, just calm observation. A balloon in his hand. And then, the moment they had waited 15 years for, he looked up and saw them watching him. Time slowed. The grandfather's breath caught in his throat. Raymond Deeks locked eyes with him for less than a second, but it was enough. A flicker of recognition passed between them. Deeks froze. No fear, just surprise, calculated and sharp. Then he turned. Not in a rush, not panicked, but smoothly, almost rehearsed. He walked calmly toward the exit of the fair, weaving through clusters of families, blending into the crowd like he had done so many times before. Eyes on him. Marlene's voice cracked through the earpiece, barely concealing the tremor. Officers moved in quietly, subtly, not to spook the crowd. But Deeks was already adapting. He slipped between booths, ducked beneath a tent, discarded the balloon, removed the hat. In less than 30 seconds, he was transformed. Just another man in a white shirt and jeans, indistinguishable. The grandfather tried to follow, but the crowd swallowed him whole. They lost visual. Panic flared. Marlene directed teams to cover all exits. Clara scanned faces frantically. For a moment, it felt like the past was repeating, Deeks slipping through their fingers like vapor. But then, a volunteer watching security footage noticed something. Check camera 7, she said. The feed showed Deeks entering a porta-potty behind the concession stand. He never came out. They waited. 1 minute. 2. 3. Nothing. SWAT was called in quietly. When they breached the door, the space was empty, except for a maintenance hatch leading underground. A crawl space. Deeks had vanished again into the belly of the fairgrounds. It was like chasing a ghost. The grandfather stared at the open hatch and felt sick. He planned this, he whispered. He knew we'd be here. The whole fair had been a stage. The performance? A warning. You can't catch me. Later that night, the sheriff's team discovered a note taped beneath the bench beside the puppet show stage. Folded tightly, small, scrawled in block letters. Not her. Not yet. For words that chilled the room. It wasn't just a taunt. It was a message. He had come close to another child that day, but didn't take her. Why? Was it the pressure? The surveillance? Or something worse? Was he waiting for a bigger statement? Marlene looked around at the silent group. He's changing his game, she said. But he's not done. The grandfather clenched the fabric from Emily's dress in his pocket, heart heavy with rage. Deeks was no longer just a fugitive. He was a hunter. And now, the hunters had become the hunted. The town of Cedar Grove didn't sleep that night. Officers patrolled empty streets while parents locked windows and kept children close. The fair remained closed the next day, canceled indefinitely. But beneath the quiet panic, a different kind of fire burned. Determination. They had seen his face, heard his name, and now they had proof that Raymond Deeks was alive, calculating, and still playing a game that no one else understood. The note, not her, not yet, echoed in the grandfather's mind. It was not just a message. It was a line drawn in the sand. Back at Marlene's safe house, they examined every second of footage. From the moment Deeks entered the fairgrounds to his final disappearance through the maintenance hatch. They tracked his gait, his posture, even his eye movements. Clara noticed something chilling. He had passed by the same child twice. A girl in a yellow dress, no older than 7, who had wandered from her parents momentarily. Deeks had paused both times. His hand had even moved toward his pocket. But then he turned away. Not her. Not yet. It wasn't random. He had been watching her. Choosing. Deciding. But something had stopped him. Was it the increased security? The presence of Clara, Marlene, and the grandfather? Or had the girl reminded him of someone else? Someone like Emily? The team couldn't be sure. But one thing was clear. He had almost acted. And that meant his pattern was unraveling. The predator was getting bold again. Reckless. And with recklessness came mistakes. They interviewed the little girl's parents, who remember a man offering their daughter a balloon and saying something odd. Want to see the secret stage? The phrase sent chills through everyone present. There was no secret stage. It was a lure, a scripted line, and he had almost used it. The grandfather clenched his jaw. He's rehearsing, he murmured, like a magician before a trick. But this wasn't a performance. It was preparation, a dry run for something worse. Marlene reached out to federal agents again, urging them to elevate Deeks to high-priority status. They now had enough evidence for a nationwide manhunt. Facial composites were updated, his alias history compiled. But Deeks had survived for decades by being ordinary, forgettable, a man you passed at a diner, a gas station, a carnival. He wasn't just a face in a crowd, he was the crowd. And as they realized this, a terrifying truth settled over them. To catch him, they'd have to stop thinking like victims. They'd have to start thinking like him. That night, the grandfather did something he hadn't done in years. He opened Emily's old room. The walls were still painted with clouds and butterflies. Her small bookshelf sat untouched. A dollhouse gathered dust near the window. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding a picture of her dressed in that pink sundress, her smile wide and unaware. I'm still here, he whispered, voice breaking. And I'm not going anywhere until you come home. One way or another. As he sat in the quiet, his mind began replaying the fair. Deeks' exact movements, his decisions, the way he vanished. One detail stuck out. The route he had taken after discarding the balloon. It wasn't the most direct path to the exit. He had gone around the puppet stage, past the water tanks, beneath a specific arch. The grandfather pulled up the map of the fairgrounds again. That route wasn't random. It was a pattern, a shape. Marlene noticed it too. He's choreographing his exits, she said. Not just fleeing. Signaling. They overlaid the paths from footage in Cedar Grove and compared it to earlier sightings, in festival footage from 2008 and 2011. The paths weren't just escape routes. They formed letters. One resembled another, a twisted M. And now, the latest, curved like a question mark. Or a hook. What is he trying to say? Clara asked, leaning over the sketches. The grandfather's voice was quiet, but steady. He wants us to keep chasing. He's writing something in pieces. A message spelled across cities. A grim silence fell over the group. Deeks wasn't just running. He was crafting a final act. A stage so large, no single town could see it. Only those who'd been following all along could read the script. Suddenly, a call came in from a volunteer in Iowa. A boy had gone missing at a traveling flea market. No screams, no struggle, just vanished. The boy's name, Daniel. Age, 7. The same day, the same pattern. And next to the boy's mother's purse on the grass, they found a balloon. Blue, untied, floating quietly in the breeze. The race wasn't over. It had just escalated. The news of Daniel's disappearance hit them like a punch to the chest. All the air left the room. No one spoke for several seconds. The grandfather gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Clara stared blankly at the balloon on the news broadcast, her hand trembling slightly. Marlene, her voice cold and mechanical, said what everyone was thinking. He didn't just slip away this time. He took someone. The balance had shifted. The hunter had struck again. Local authorities in Iowa were already mobilized, but overwhelmed. No camera footage. No witnesses who remembered anything unusual. Just that same quiet exit. A child stepping away for just a second and disappearing between two tents. A police dog traced a scent to the edge of a field where tire tracks were found. That was it. Another child gone. Another mother screaming. Another town learning how fast innocence can be erased. And Deeks had left no trace behind except a shape. The carnival map revealed it again. His escape formed a looping D. Now the letters were clear. EMD. A name? A phrase? A code? The grandfather laid them out across a large corkboard, staring until his eyes ached. He's spelling something, he muttered. Something personal. Clara whispered. Maybe a message to us. Or a signature. Marlene, ever the profiler, stepped back and studied the formation. He's not communicating with the police, she said. He's communicating with you. The grandfather recoiled slightly at that thought. It made too much sense. All the breadcrumbs had led to him. The note under his bench. The fabric under his fence. Even the encounter at the fair. Deeks had looked right at him. He wasn't just taunting the system. He was taunting one man. This wasn't about Daniel. Or even Emily. It was about control. Deeks was trying to pull him deeper into the game. But something else gnawed at the grandfather's mind. Why now? Why resurface after 15 years? Why leave new clues? Why take a new child just as the investigation had reignited? Unless this had never stopped. Unless there were others. Children never connected to the same man. Cases buried in different counties. Disappearances masked as runaways. He turned to Marlene. We need to look for patterns between the letters. The dates. The geography. She nodded. If we can predict his next move, maybe we can stop it. But time was slipping away. Daniel had already been missing for 10 hours. And if Deeks followed the same cycle as before, they might only have 2 days to find him. Maybe less. The clock had started ticking again. And this time, they weren't just chasing a ghost. They were racing a deadline. They built a map wall in Marlene's basement. Each red pin marked a disappearance. Blue pins for sightings. Green pins for clues. Notes, fabric, photos, or messages. Yellow pins for the letters. The trails Deeks had left behind. The web spread across 6 states. But it wasn't random. It bent and curved like handwriting. Clara stared at it for hours until she saw it. Yeah. He's spelling something, she said again. Maybe a name. Maybe a place. Meanwhile, volunteers worked tirelessly to dig into cold cases, feeding them with dozens of files each hour. That's when one name popped up again and again. Meadowfield. A ghost town. Abandoned since the early 1980s after a mining accident. No police department. No residents. Just empty roads and decaying buildings. And yet, records showed strange things. Random credit card charges from gas stations 20 miles away. Satellite images revealing fresh tire tracks near the edge of the town. It was a perfect hiding spot. Marlene traced the connection. Deeks had worked at a carnival that passed through Meadowfields County in 1997. It was the last known location before his first arrest. That couldn't be coincidence. It had to be intentional. She reached out to federal agents, urging them to send a tactical team. But the response was slow. Protocol, jurisdiction, wait lists. So the trio made a decision. They'd go first, just to observe, just to see if it was real. Clara packed a bag without hesitation. The grandfather loaded his car. Marlene brought surveillance equipment and a drone. They drove all night, the road growing darker and emptier with each mile. Meadowfield felt like a place lost to time. Houses with shattered windows, weeds taller than mailboxes, power lines drooping like dead limbs. But as the sun rose, something strange stood out. One house had a curtain drawn. Not tattered, not old, clean, new. They parked 2 blocks away and watched. Hours passed. Nothing. No movement. No vehicles. Just silence and dust. But then, as the wind picked up, the curtain shifted, and behind it, the unmistakable shadow of a man. Still, watching, waiting. Deeks was there. He had led them to his den. But had he made a mistake? Or was this exactly where he wanted them? For several long seconds, no one moved. The air inside the car was thick with tension, each breath shallow, each heartbeat louder than the last. The grandfather's eyes locked on the shape behind the curtain. It was him. Deeks. There was no doubt anymore. He hadn't just resurfaced. He had invited them. Marlene whispered, "He's not hiding. He's performing. This is his finale." But Clara, scanning the surroundings, sensed something different. "No, not a finale," she said. "He's setting the stage." They watched the house from the cover of an abandoned truck garage across the street. As the hours passed, subtle movements betrayed the illusion of stillness. The flicker of a light behind the curtain, a figure pacing in the back room, a flash of metal, a tool, maybe a lock, maybe something worse. At one point, a child's voice echoed faintly from inside. It was impossible to tell if it was real or recorded, but it made the grandfather's blood run cold. Suddenly, the curtain moved again, slow, deliberate, and Deeks appeared in full view. He looked older now, face thinner, skin stretched, but his eyes, those hollow, unreadable eyes, were the same. And in his hand, pressed against the glass, was a new note. For words, just like the last. He's still with me. The words sank like stone into their chests. Daniel. He was alive. Or so Deeks wanted them to believe. The grandfather gritted his teeth. We go in, he said. Now. But Marlene stopped him. We can't rush. That's exactly what he wants. He's controlling every move. If we go in blind, we could lose the boy. Or worse. Clara nodded, her voice barely audible. We wait until dark. Then we get in, find Daniel, and end this. The plan was risky, dangerous. But waiting for backup meant losing time they might not have. They reviewed the layout, noting possible entry points. The side door had no lock. The rear window was cracked. The basement, half exposed from erosion, might be accessible. As night fell, the house seemed to sink deeper into shadow. The moon lit the field behind it like a spotlight. Every creak of the wind, every scrape of branch on wall felt like a warning. They moved silently, splitting into positions. Marlene set the drone to hover, watching from above. Clara circled to the back, flashlight off. The grandfather approached the basement entrance, heart pounding in his ears. The door was unlocked. He stepped inside slowly, flashlight barely flickering against the dust-thick air. The basement smelled of mildew, rust, and something else. Old metal and faded memories. Broken toys lined the shelves. A child's shoe sat in the corner. He scanned every inch, heart in his throat, until he saw it. A sleeping bag. Crumpled. Still warm. Nearby, a small juice box, half full. Daniel had been there. Maybe still was. Upstairs, Clara entered through the back hallway, careful not to disturb the floorboards. The silence of the house was unnatural, like every sound had been swallowed. A hallway led to a shut door, and behind it, a voice. Faint. A child humming a song, over and over. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Her hand reached for the knob, but just as she touched it, it swung open from the inside. Deke stood there. They locked eyes. His smile was slow, chilling. You're early, he said, voice gravelly and calm. I hadn't finished setting the table. Clara froze, too stunned to respond. He raised his hands, not in surrender, but in performance, as though on stage. No weapons, he whispered. No games. You came for the boy, didn't you? Then follow. He turned and walked into the dark hallway. Clara hesitated, then followed, steps light and careful. Down the hall, he opened a door to a room bathed in soft blue light. Inside, Daniel sat on a blanket, wide-eyed, unharmed, and silent. He didn't speak, didn't cry. He just stared, frozen. Clara stepped toward him, but Deeks blocked her. He's safe for now, but what about the others? He gestured to a wall lined with photos. Dozens of children, faces circled in red. Some she recognized. Most she didn't. Downstairs, the grandfather moved to the staircase, hearing Deeks's voice through the floorboards. He caught fragments, truth, choice, legacy, words that made his stomach turn. This wasn't just a crime scene. This was a shrine, a sermon. Deeks had created a world where he played God, puppeteer, judge. And tonight, he had called them here to witness it. But what he hadn't counted on was that they wouldn't play along. Suddenly, the front door burst open. Marlene entered, firearm drawn, eyes scanning fast. Deeks turned, that smile still on his face. The profiler. Right on time. But he didn't run. He didn't flinch. He simply stepped back into the shadows and whispered, "The curtain is down. But the story's not over." And then, with a flick of a switch, the lights cut to black. For a moment, there was only darkness, thick, suffocating, and absolute. the kind of darkness that presses against your skin and crawls down your spine. Then came the sound. A metal door slamming. A lock turning. Somewhere upstairs, a trap had been triggered. Marlene called out, "Clara? Grandfather?" No answer. She activated the flashlight on her weapon, slicing a beam through the void. The house moaned with the shifting of old wood, as though it too was alive, complicit in the game Deeks had prepared. Downstairs, the grandfather stumbled backward as the lights vanished, his only guide now a faint blue flicker from the room above. He could hear footsteps, not Deeks's. Smaller, quieter, a child's. "Daniel," he whispered. "It's okay. I'm here." But the voice that responded wasn't the boy's. It was Clara. He locked me in the hallway. He's moving through the walls. The realization hit them all at once. The house had been altered, gutted and rebuilt like a maze. Hidden doors, false floors, secret passages. Deeks hadn't just planned this. He had lived here. Meanwhile, Daniel remained curled in the corner, eyes wide but unblinking, his lips pressed tight together. Marlene reached him first, crouching slowly, murmuring, "You're safe now. We're going to get you out." He didn't speak, didn't nod, but his hands clutched a crumpled piece of paper. Marlene gently unfolded it. For words, written in red crayon, crooked and trembling, "There's one more room." Her breath caught. "He's not done." Upstairs, Clara found a panel in the wall slightly ajar. Behind it, a narrow crawl space led to what appeared to be a sealed attic. The path was littered with scraps, photos, buttons, locks of hair, children's drawings, all cataloged like museum relics. Clara's flashlight trembled as she pressed forward, crawling into the dark like descending into memory itself. She reached the attic door and kicked it open. Inside, a single chair faced a projector screen, and on it grainy footage played on loop. Children, dozens, laughing, running, vanishing. Back in the basement, the grandfather found the edge of trapdoor. Beneath it, another staircase spiraled into the earth. Cold air seeped through the cracks. He hesitated, then opened it. The steps groaned as he descended, deeper than a home's foundation should allow. At the bottom, he entered a room lined with mirrors. And in the center, another child's sundress, Emily's, hanging like a ghost. He felt his knees. Tears spilled from his eyes, fists clenched. And then, from behind one of the mirrors, a voice whispered, "Now you see." It was Deeks, always just behind the wall, always one step ahead. But this time, something shifted. Deeks didn't sound triumphant. He sounded tired, as though even the predator was growing weary of the chase. Marlene helped Daniel to his feet, guiding him carefully down the stairs. The boy was silent but compliant, like he had been rehearsed into stillness. As they reached the ground floor, the front door burst open again. This time, backup had arrived. Sheriff Cole, 2 tactical officers, and a medic swept in. "We've got the boy," Marlene shouted. "Lock down the perimeter. He's still inside." Clara emerged from the attic crawl space, her hands filthy, eyes haunted. "He's showing us everything," she muttered, like a farewell performance. They began combing the house again, this time together, faster, more methodical. Every room revealed another piece of his twisted collection. Photos of fairs, locks of hair labeled with initials, childlike journal entries that spiraled into madness. Deeks had documented everything, not because he wanted to be caught, but because he wanted to be understood. In the basement, the grandfather stood up slowly, eyes still on the sundress. "She was here," he whispered. "He brought her here." And from the shadowed mirror, Deeks's voice answered, "She stayed longer than the others. She was special." The rage boiled in the grandfather's chest, but he forced himself to speak calmly. "Where is she now?" A pause. Then, softly, "She left." The team broke through the mirrored wall, revealing a narrow hall behind it. A cot, a tray of rusted utensils, crayons, a child's drawing taped to the wall, a girl holding hands with a faceless man. Beneath it, scrawled in childish letters, "He said I could go if I was good." The silence that followed was unbearable. Had she been released? Or had she escaped? Or worse? Sheriff Cole reached for his radio. "We need cadaver dogs. Every inch of this house. Every inch of this land." But then, from the crawl space beneath the floorboards, a creaking sound. A hatch they hadn't noticed before. A place even deeper. As they opened it, the stale air of decades past rose to meet them. Inside boxes, dozens of them, labeled with years. 2008, 2009, 2010, one for each summer. Inside the 2008 box, they found something that stopped the room cold. A videotape, labeled only with her name, Emily. The grandfather fell to his knees again, gripping the tape like it was her heartbeat. "Please," he whispered, "let this end." But Deeks' voice echoed once more from the shadows. "It doesn't end. It continues. With or without me." He had prepared for this, for the moment they found him. But the question now wasn't whether he would escape again. It was what would be left behind. The air was heavy in the room, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The grandfather clutched the tape, fingers trembling, afraid of what it might reveal, but terrified to not know. Marlene gently helped him to his feet. "We'll play together," she said softly. They carried the box upstairs to the main room, where a portable player had been set up by one of the officers. As the tape slid into the machine and clicked into place, time seemed to slow. The screen flickered. Then came the static. And then, her face. Emily. Just a flash at first. A blurry image of her in a small room, sitting cross-legged on a mat, hair pulled back, eyes uncertain but calm. She looked older than she should have been. Not 2, not 3, closer to 4. The timestamp in the corner read, July 18th, 2009. A full year after she had vanished. The room was clean, lit by soft lamps, and covered in childish drawings. Someone, Deeks, was speaking to her off-camera in a quiet voice. "Say goodnight, Emily." And she did. Her voice was soft, real, alive. Gasps filled the room. Tears streamed down the grandfather's face. She had survived, at least for a while. Clara covered her mouth with both hands, whispering. He kept her alive. But then came a second realization. If she had been alive a year later, then why had she never returned? The tape ended abruptly after just under 2 minutes. No violence, no explanation, just her, and then darkness. They searched the box for more, but it was the only tape marked with her name. They cataloged everything, boxes, drawings, files. But not another piece of evidence mentioned her fate. She had simply vanished again, this time into the abyss of Deeks' twisted timeline. What if he let her go? Marlene asked, thinking aloud. He said she was special. Maybe she convinced him. But the grandfather's eyes stayed fixed on the dark screen. Or maybe he took her somewhere else. Somewhere no one has searched. His voice cracked. Somewhere he thought she'd be safe from him. Outside, dawn was beginning to rise, casting golden light over the rotting house. The property was crawling with investigators, dogs, and forensic teams. But inside that room, the past felt very present. They had proof now. Concrete, chilling, undeniable. Deeks was real. Emily had lived. Daniel had been saved. But so many others remained lost. And then Marlene's phone buzzed with a new alert. Surveillance caught a man, mid-50s, long coat, clean-shaven, exiting a rest stop 2 towns away. He had left something behind. A sketch. On the back, a phrase written in crooked cursive. The last curtain falls in Crescent Hill. Another location. Another performance. Deeks wasn't done. He was already moving again. The team stared at the message. The name Crescent Hill etched in their minds like a countdown. It was a small town less than 60 miles from where they stood. A quiet place nestled between rolling farmlands and broken railroads. Marlene ran the coordinates immediately. "He's moving faster now," she said. This wasn't part of the pattern. "He's improvising." Claire stepped forward. "Or accelerating. He knows we're close." The grandfather didn't say a word. His eyes were still fixed on the image of Emily frozen on the dark screen, as though trying to memorize every detail of her that remained. By midday, the team was on the road again, exhausted but fueled by urgency. Crescent Hill had 1 motel, 1 diner, a few gas stations, and a defunct community theater. The perfect place for Deeks to stage his final act. They arrived just as the sun reached its peak, casting long shadows over the empty sidewalks. Locals hadn't seen anything suspicious, but at the far edge of town, near the theater, they found something odd. A flyer, pinned to a light pole, hand-drawn in thick marker. "One night only. The Vanishing Girl. Curtain at 7. The drawing showed a stage, a small chair, and a balloon floating in the background. It was unmistakably Deeks. "He's daring us," Clara muttered. "He wants an audience." Marlene was already contacting tactical teams, but the grandfather stepped closer to the poster. Something about the drawing struck him. It was familiar. The girl's dress. The stars. The pigtails. It was Emily. He was returning to the beginning. They secured the perimeter, entering the dusty old theater through the back. The seats were covered in sheets. The stage still held the skeleton of old props and broken lights. But center stage, under a single functioning spotlight, sat a wooden box. Inside it, another videotape. No writing. No label. No message. Just waiting. Marlene stared at it. "Do we play it?" The grandfather stepped forward and answered, "No. We finish it." He turned to the seats, sensing something that hadn't been there before. At the far back row, someone had recently sat, dust displaced, cushion dented. He moved quickly toward it, and there, tucked under the armrest, another note. 4 words. Always 4 words. Final bow. Your turn. Deeks wasn't just ending his act. He was handing the stage over. The silence inside the theater was deafening. The grandfather stood at the back row, holding the note as if it were a lit fuse. Final bow. Your turn. It wasn't just a message. It was a challenge. An invitation. A test. Marlene paced the aisle, voice tight with urgency. "He's setting us up. There's always a trap." Clara moved toward the stage, scanning the shadows. "Or a truth," she whispered. "Something he wants us to see, or feel, or choose." They approached the wooden box under the spotlight. It was old, carved with strange etchings, symbols, names, numbers. The lock was broken, already hanging open, as though Deeks had wanted it to be opened. Inside, aside from the tape, was something else, a small, folded drawing. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the crayon lines faded. But the subject was unmistakable. Emily, standing beside an older man. She was smiling. The man's face had no features, just a shadowed outline. Beneath them were 3 words written in a child's shaky hand. "He let me." The grandfather dropped to his knees, heart pounding. He touched the paper as if it were skin. She was alive, he said. And she wasn't just held, she understood something. He let her go. Clara sat beside him, speechless. Maybe she was the only one who didn't fear him, she whispered. Maybe that's why she wasn't destroyed. Marlene turned the tape in her hand. "He's given us the last piece, the end of the story. But we have to decide whether to watch it or walk away." But the grandfather already knew the answer. They hadn't come this far to look away. They had followed every clue, suffered every wound, seen every horror. If the tape held Emily's fate, if it held any part of her still, he had to see it. He placed the tape into the player they had brought and pressed play. The screen flickered once, twice, then an image appeared. Not a basement, not a cage, a park, a bench, a girl, no older than 5, walking toward the camera. She wore a hoodie. Her hair was longer now. Her face, older, wiser. It was Emily. She stopped, stared at the lens, and said clearly, "If you found this, I'm okay." He said I could choose, and I chose to go. But I didn't forget you. I never will. Then she smiled. "Tell Grandpa I remember the bubbles." The video cut to black. No tears came, just silence. The grandfather collapsed into the seat, hands trembling but steady now. He had seen her. He had heard her. Marlene turned away, eyes misted. Clara wiped her face and whispered, "She survived. And she escaped him. She really did." The weight of that truth settled in their bones. Not just grief, but something else now. Peace. But just as that peace began to form, another sound came from the stage. A soft click. A small compartment opened behind the spotlight, revealing a final box. No tape. No letter. Just an object. A single balloon. Red. Untied. And beneath it, carved into the wood, were 4 last words. One girl still missing. The air turned cold. The grandfather stepped forward, heart once again pounding with a familiar dread. One girl still missing. It couldn't be Emily. She had survived. She had chosen. And she had escaped. So who was Deeks referring to now? Marlene crouched beside the box, running her fingers along the carved letters. "It's not a warning," she said. "It's a prophecy. He's not just ending the story. He's passing it on." They reviewed the names and the files again. The drawings. The case numbers. That night, In a motel room just outside Crescent Hill, the team sat in silence, surrounded by evidence, trying to decipher the final twist. Then Clara gasped. "It's not her that's missing, it's him." The room went still. She pointed to a photo recovered from the Meadowfield house, one of Deeks as a child. There was a girl in the photo with him. Always cut out, always hidden. But in this one, part of her name is visible. Marlene stood quickly, pulling the file. A Sarah Deeks. His twin. The record was thin. A single hospital form. No death certificate. No school enrollment. Just gone. What if she was the first? The one who vanished before the story even began? The grandfather asked. What if everything he's done was about her? The possibility shook them. What if Deeks wasn't just a monster? What if he was chasing a ghost of his own? Suddenly it all shifted. The notes. The riddles. The symbols carved into the boxes. They weren't trophies. They were signposts. Searching. Recreating. Rewriting the one loss he could never undo. She's the origin, Marlene said. The first vanishing. And every other child was him trying to relive it, reverse it, understand it. Clara added quietly. And maybe find her again. The grandfather sat down slowly, overwhelmed. He wasn't trying to hide from us. He was leaving a trail for her. For Sarah. Hoping one day, she'd follow it back. The realization shattered everything they thought they knew. Deeks wasn't just a predator. He was a brother, still searching in the most twisted way imaginable. And now, the final balloon, the final words, they weren't just the end. They were a message to someone else. Sarah was real, and she might still be out there. The night that followed was restless. The motel room, though silent, seemed filled with the echoes of Deeks's final move. One girl still missing. It was both confession and summons. Marlene spent hours digging into adoption records, mental health facilities, and missing persons registries from the 1970s and 1980s. The name Sarah Deeks returned no living record. No death. No transfer. As if she had been erased. Or hidden. Clara stared at the old photo, recovered from Meadowfield, now enhanced digitally. Deeks, as a boy, stood in a sunlit yard, holding a balloon with one hand, the other clearly resting on someone who had been deliberately cut from the image. But new technology revealed the faint outline of a dress, a small hand, and part of a face. The girl had existed. Her presence, though faint, was undeniable. She wasn't imaginary, Clara said. She was taken, or she ran. The grandfather leaned against the windowsill, exhausted, but watching the horizon. What if he never hurt the children because he wasn't trying to destroy? He asked aloud. What if each one was a replacement? A reenactment? Trying to fix what happened to her? The theory chilled the room. Deeks, the monster, had been acting out the same trauma over and over, searching for Sarah and every little girl who trusted him. Then Marlene found something. A journal entry from one of the earliest cases. A young girl had told her therapist, after being returned, that the man said I reminded him of someone named Sasa. She had assumed it was nonsense. A child's misunderstanding. But now, Sasa, Sarah, the same syllables, softened by a child's voice. The same name. Deeks had whispered it for decades. There was one last hope. A nun at a convent in the Appalachian region had once reported caring for a girl named Sarah, dropped off by an older boy in the mid-1980s. The girl never spoke. She vanished from the records 2 years later. The convent, abandoned for years, was still there. Remote. Difficult to reach. But suddenly, the team felt it. The final thread. Marlene, voice low, said, "That's where he's going." And somehow, they knew. He wanted them to follow. The drive into the Appalachian Hills took hours. Roads narrowed into gravel, then into nothing but winding forest paths. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rumble of tires over stone. The grandfather hadn't spoken since they left Crescent Hill. His hands clutched the sketch Emily had made all those years ago. Her smile, her message. He let me go. But had he let go of Sarah? Or had she slipped away and become his ghost? They reached the convent at dusk. It sat on a hill like a forgotten cathedral, crumbling, vines claiming the stone. The windows were dark, the doors chained, but not locked. Inside, dust danced in the fading light, and old pews groaned under decades of silence. In the back chapel, they found it, a makeshift altar, Candles burned down to wax pools. On the wall, hundreds of drawings. Girls. Names. Some crossed out. One circled in red, Sarah D. A single chair sat in the center. And on it, Raymond Deeks. Alive. Waiting. He didn't speak. He simply looked at them as they entered. His eyes were tired, sunken, but no longer hiding. The grandfather stepped forward first, fist clenched but steady. "Why here?" he asked. Deeks answered softly. "Because this is where I lost her, and where she found herself." He gestured to the wall. "She left me here. Left me. And I've been looking ever since." Clara asked, "Was this all about her? All those children?" Deeks turned slowly. "None of them were her. I kept hoping, but they never looked at me the way she did." His voice trembled. "Until one day, one girl did, and I let her go." The grandfather knew who he meant. "Emily." Marlene raised her voice. "Where's Sarah now?" Deeks smiled faintly. "She's not missing. She's free." Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. He tossed it gently onto the ground. It showed a woman in her 50s, standing outside a church, smiling. She never looked back, and she never wanted to be found. He paused. "But I wanted you to know she was real. She's the reason I broke, and the reason I stopped." Then he did something no one expected. He raised his hands and whispered, "It's over." But they all knew. It wasn't. The silence after his surrender was surreal. No resistance. No twisted monologue. No final escape. Just a whisper. "It's over." But as the grandfather stared at Deeks, this man who had destroyed so many lives in search of one, he realized the truth. This was never about closure. It was about understanding how far grief can stretch before it becomes something else entirely. Something monstrous. Officers moved in and cuffed Deeks without struggle. He didn't speak another word. He just kept his eyes fixed on the photo of Sarah lying at his feet. Clara knelt to pick it up. It was dated only 2 years prior. On the back, in careful cursive, were the words, "Please stop looking for me. I forgave you long ago." Her handwriting. A voice from the past he had chased his entire life and ignored when she spoke. Clara stared at it, stunned. She knew, she whispered. She knew what he became, and tried to stop it. Marlene moved carefully through the back of the chapel. There, tucked behind the altar, she found more. Letters, journals, videos never sent. Deeks had been documenting not just his crimes, but his obsession, his longing, his mental unraveling over years. In one of the tapes, he sat in the same chair, speaking directly to the camera. "They think I hurt them because I'm evil. But I was just trying to find her again. Each girl was a chance. I kept them safe. But none of them ever stayed." He hadn't killed to silence them. He had released them once he knew they weren't her. But how many of those children never found their way back home? How many slipped through the cracks of a system too broken to hold them? As the sun set behind the shattered stained glass, casting crimson light across the walls, the grandfather stood over Deeks, who sat silently, hands bound. "Emily," he said, voice shaking. "Where did she go?" Deeks looked up, eyes softer than expected. "She asked me to leave her at a church on Route 7. Said she didn't want to go home. Said she wanted a new name." The words hit like a blade. Marlene looked at the grandfather. If she changed her name, if she started over, she could still be out there. Alive. Unknowing. Waiting. Weeks passed. Raymond Deeks was taken into custody, facing decades of charges for abductions, child endangerment, and obstruction of justice. But in the end, it wasn't punishment that mattered. It was truth. Closure, in fragments. Wounds, finally allowed to scar. The media swarmed the story, calling him the phantom puppeteer. But for those who had chased him, he wasn't a myth. He was a man. A broken, grieving boy who had built a prison from memory and called it sanctuary. Marlene compiled every file into a single archive and turned it over to the federal database of missing persons. Clara returned to the families they had met, sharing what piece she could. But the grandfather, he wasn't done. He began visiting churches along Route 7. Quietly, patiently, he carried Emily's photo in his pocket. Not to ask, not to demand. Just to look, to hope, to wait. Then, one afternoon, at a shelter run by Dominican nuns, he saw her. A woman in her late teens or early 20s. She wore her hair in a tight braid. She worked quietly in the garden, And when she turned and smiled at a child chasing butterflies, his heart stopped. The same smile. He didn't approach her that day. He returned the next, and the next. And finally, on the third day, she walked up to him and said, "You've been watching me." He couldn't speak. She tilted her head. "I don't know who you are, but I feel like I've seen you before." He swallowed, barely managing the words. "Do you remember, Bubbles?" A long silence. Then a smile. A real one. Soft. Familiar. And her eyes filled with tears. "I do." She didn't run into his arms. She didn't cry. She just sat beside him on the bench, and they watched the sky change together. There were no balloons, no cages, no shadows, just a quiet wind, and the feeling that a story that had taken 15 years, dozens of names, and unthinkable darkness had finally found its light. Some stories do not end with a door closing or a case solved. Some endings come softly, like a breath after years of holding it in. This journey, which began with a child vanishing during a family barbecue, unraveled into something much deeper, a meditation on grief, obsession, and the human capacity for both darkness and light. It showed us that even the most twisted paths can be rooted in longing, and that sometimes healing doesn't roar, it whispers. Raymond Deeks will never be remembered as just a criminal. He will be remembered as a broken mirror of what grief can become when it's never addressed, when it festers in the shadows and is fed by silence. But even in his wake, something remarkable survived. The children, the ones who escaped, the ones who were found, the ones who, despite the terror, never stopped hoping someone would come looking. And above all, Emily, not as a victim, but as a survivor who rewrote her own story. This was never just about solving a mystery. It was about understanding the weight people carry and the power of choosing to move forward, even when the past claws at your heels. It was about how memory can imprison or free, and how the smallest gestures, like remembering bubbles in a garden, can break the deepest silence. It reminds us that sometimes justice comes not with punishment, but with truth. And truth, when faced without fear, can heal generations. So if this story left a mark on you, let it stay. Let it make you more attentive, more compassionate. Let it remind you that behind every news headline, every missing person poster, and every closed case file, there are still echoes waiting to be heard. Some answers may take 15 years. Others may never come. But the act of searching, of not forgetting, is sometimes the greatest justice of all. And if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful voices aren't the ones who speak the loudest, but the ones who are finally heard.